Power, live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Kate Davidson, I'm Joe Matthew. Tonight, the president on the world stage, aiming his ire at the United Nations and backing Ukraine.
The Russian economy is terrible right now. As you know, it's crashing. And that, frankly, Ukraine is doing a very good job of stopping this very large army. It's pretty amazing.
The whirlwind of action from the president at the UN today has made a surprise full-throated backing of Ukraine. Blasting the UN and meeting with world leaders like Argentina's president. We'll analyze how his remarks were received here at home and abroad when we speak with Democratic Congressman Seth Moulton, a member of the House Armed Services Committee, and Ed Miliband, UK's Secretary of State for Energy Security.
Also tonight, as the Secretary of State reaffirms the country's commitment to NATO in the wake of Russian aggression, how are other nations preparing against Vladimir Putin? More in our sit-down with Finland's President Alexander Stubb up ahead.
We'll also have fresh remarks from Federal Reserve Chair Jay Powell laying out the country's economic outlook today as investors look for signals on the path toward interest rates.
Plus, Jamie Dimon speaks out on the administration's H-1B visa change and how private businesses are reacting to the new $100,000 price tag.
And just 7 days until the federal government shuts down without a deal, the president's comments toward Democratic leaders and the potential for any sort of last-minute deal coming up this hour. But we begin with the avalanche of news coming out of the United Nations and the president as his remarks to the UN General Assembly earlier today, with more than a half dozen bilateral meetings on the sidelines taking place. The president making more headlines just a short time ago on Ukraine. We want to get right to Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall, joining us now live from the United Nations in New York. Tyler, this is a different sounding President Trump in a lengthy post to Truth Social, suggesting that it is now possible, in his view, for Ukraine to win the war.
Right, exactly, Joe. Actually, a pretty stunning development, a shift in tone from the president, saying that he now feels that the country is able to take back all of its territory. It comes after he had a meeting on the sidelines here at the UN General Assembly with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. And it also comes against this broader backdrop that in recent weeks we have seen air violations for our NATO allies, including Poland, Estonia, Romania. And President Trump said today that he would lend his he believes that these NATO allies should engage and shoot down those aircraft if they do violate airspace again, though he did decline to say whether or not the U.S. would get involved, saying that it ultimately does depend on the circumstances. President Trump today really putting an emphasis on Ukraine, but also putting an emphasis on our European allies, who he says he wants to see add to the pressure on Russia in particular. We heard during his remarks earlier today in front of the General Assembly, he called on them to halt all imports of Russian energy supplies. He also called on them to take some additional punitive actions against those countries that do continue to import Russian energy supplies. We know, of course, China and India are at the top of that list, as the U.S. has already moved to impose so-called secondary tariffs on India in that case. And then you mentioned it at the top, though, but worth it to reiterate, Joe, President Trump really used this speech to rebuke the United Nations as an institution, said that ultimately he thinks that it is an institution with empty words, in his own words, though worth mentioning that he did meet with the UN Secretary General after his remarks, and he said while he often disagrees with the UN, ultimately he is behind it.
All right, Tyler, thank you so much. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall live outside the UN General Assembly, joining us now for more on the developments surrounding Ukraine and Russia and the impending government shutdown in Washington is Democratic Congressman Seth Moulton of Massachusetts, a combat Marine veteran who served 4 tours in Iraq, now a member of the House Armed Services Committee, a member of the House China Select Committee. Congressman, it's great to see you. Welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. The words of the president on Truth Social: Ukraine, with the support of the European Union, is in a position to fight and win all of Ukraine back in its original form. Is this a breakthrough? This does not sound like the same President Trump who has talked about the war in the past. Do you take him at his word?
You can never take Donald Trump at his word, but he has never used the word win since he took office. And that's what's so extraordinary. We haven't had a plan to win the war under this administration since they took over. Biden talked a lot about Ukraine winning. We've never heard that from Donald Trump. And I, as a member of the Armed Services Committee, have repeatedly asked this question of Trump administration officials. I said, look, there was bipartisan criticism of the Biden administration for not doing enough to win. They said they wanted Ukraine to win, but we weren't sure they were doing enough quickly enough to make it happen. What is your plan to win? And they refuse to answer the question. They have never had a plan to win. So I guess they're going to have to come up with one now. Maybe they should start by just going back to what the Biden administration was trying to do.
Well, Congressman, is the iron hot right now for a new aid package to Ukraine?
You know, the Democrats have been fighting for aid to Ukraine since the war began. And Republicans are hot or cold on it based on the whims of the president, not based on principle, not based on fighting for freedom, not based on what Ukraine needs on the ground, but just based on the whims of Donald Trump. So my suspicion is the answer to your question is yes, that all of a sudden now, because Trump has for the first time said he actually wants our ally, the democracy, to win the war against this communist aggressor in Russia, the first time the president has truly sided with Ukraine over our arch enemy, that, yeah, a lot of Republicans will suddenly be on board. That's my guess.
Congressman, I spoke today with the president of Latvia, who was in the room for the president's speech. Edgar Rinkovich knows what it's like to be on the front lines looking across the border into Russia, knows what it's like to have his airspace violated, as we've seen more recently with Poland and Estonia. And I asked him about the president's remarks, whether, in fact, Russian aircraft should be shot down, as he said, if they enter the airspace of NATO allies. Listen to what the president of Latvia said. We'll have you respond.
President Trump and other leaders who have expressed their views on this issue are right. If Russian aircrafts keep flying, keep violating our airspace, NATO's airspace, then the only way how to stop them is to show force.
What is that show of force, though, Congressman? There is an Article 5 that already maps out how this works. What should NATO allies do if Vladimir Putin keeps pushing the line?
They should do exactly what our NATO allies did, even though under Trump, the U.S. refused to participate when those drones went into Poland several nights ago. And it's worth pointing out that despite Russia starting this war of aggression, despite all the support that the United States provided under the Biden administration and the regular threats that Putin delivered to the West and to NATO, including threatening the use of nuclear weapons, he never had this level of aggression against NATO under Biden. Why? Because we were strongly behind Ukraine, because we didn't show cracks in the armor, because we didn't have a president who waffled on supporting our ally in this fight. But only under Trump and his weakness with NATO and his weakness with Ukraine, and frankly his cozying up to Vladimir Putin, has Putin been willing to truly test NATO's resolve, actually putting enemy aircraft into NATO territory.
Congressman, as a member of the China Select Committee, what are you watching most closely at UNGA this week that impacts the U.S.-China relationship?
Well, frankly, Trump is very weak on China as well. And second-term Trump is even weak on China compared to first-term Trump. Because to give credit where credit is due, the widespread restrictions on chip exports to prevent China from developing the most sophisticated AI in the world, to keep us ahead in that race, basically just making sure that they're not able to just buy all the fastest chips in the world that America, of course, produces. Those chip restrictions that were reinforced under the Biden administration were actually put in place by the first Trump administration. So Trump's China team, led by the likes of Matt Pottinger, deserve a lot of credit for being tough on China in Trump's first term. Biden largely continued that policy, and that's really important for deterrence, to send a message to China. Don't do something like Vladimir Putin did in Russia. Don't try a war of aggression in the Pacific, a war that could actually lead to World War III. The biggest disaster that we and our kids could face in our lifetimes. But under the second Trump administration, he's rolled back those restrictions. He's cozying up to Xi Jinping in the same way that he has to Vladimir Putin. He's all about having a summit with Xi Jinping. He's all about talking in dialogue with not clear results whatsoever. He says there's going to be some big grand deal, and he seems to be paving the way for that by giving China all these favors. So my concern as a member of the China Committee is that Trump is being weak on China by any measure compared to the Biden administration, even compared to the first Trump administration, and that is dangerous from deterrence. And although you won't hear Republicans say that out loud, I hear a lot of Republicans on the committee say this in private as well.
That's fascinating. Congressman, there's so much more that we'd love to ask you about this, but we only have a couple of minutes left, and I need to ask you about what's happening on Capitol Hill with regard to government funding. By the time you return, I know senators are back a couple of days before the House. By the time the House comes back, the government may well be shut down. And it's unclear right now. The president says he will now not meet with Democratic leaders Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer on Thursday, as we thought was going to take place. Are we headed for a shutdown? Is that inevitable now?
It certainly looks like it, because it's completely under Trump's control. Republicans control the White House, the House, and the Senate. So this is completely their shutdown, because it's completely their government. If they're going to shut it down, it's Republicans' fault. And, you know, all Trump needs to keep government open is to have a dialogue with a few Democrats in the Senate to meet the 60-vote threshold. If he refuses to even talk, then he's going to shut down the government. And it just is further evidence that this is the most partisan political president in American history. I mean, we've been through a lot in this country, and yet we've never seen someone who is so focused on partisan politics, so focused on just attacking his enemies rather than working together as Americans in the great American tradition of debate and compromise and free speech, by the way, which Trump is obviously just trying to cancel when people disagree with him. That tradition is out the window with this president. He's just partisan, and he doesn't even care if his extreme partisanship leads him right down the road of starting his own government shutdown.
So, Congressman, are there any demands that Democrats should be or would be willing to compromise on to avoid a shutdown?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've actually put a pretty reasonable one on the table, which is just to help Americans across the country in blue states and in red states with their health care premiums, which are about to go up dramatically later this year. And so it's Democrats who are actually standing up for working Americans who don't want to have their health insurance premiums go up by something like 70–80%. If Trump lets this shutdown happen. We're the ones fighting for that. Trump and his Republican cronies on Capitol Hill are just trying to protect their tax cuts for billionaires, which of course are coming at the expense of a lot of Americans' health care. So, you know, you might think that given this position, Democrats would put something on the table that would just be good for us, you know, that might help blue states. But we're not doing that. We're the ones upholding American values, fighting for people who are not properly represented in Washington, whether they be in blue states or in red states. We're just saying everybody in America deserves to afford their own health care, to be able to afford their own health care. That shouldn't be too much to ask, and it shouldn't be too much for Trump and the Republicans to deliver in order to keep government open.
Democratic Congressman Seth Moulton of Massachusetts, thank you. Earlier today, while addressing the UN General Assembly, President Trump once again took credit for the state of the U.S. stock market.
The only thing that's up is the stock market, which just hit a record high. In fact, it hit a record high 48 times in the last short period of time. Growth is surging, manufacturing is booming. The stock market, as I said, is doing better than it's ever done, and all of you in this room benefit by that.
Meanwhile, Fed Chair Jerome Powell, speaking today to the Greater Providence Chamber of Commerce, said this about the impact President Trump's tariffs policies are having on the U.S. economy. Take a listen.
Goods prices, after falling last year, are driving the pickup inflation. Incoming data and surveys suggest that those price increases largely reflect higher tariffs rather than broader price pressures.
And to some developing news now, with a report out tonight saying the U.S. will seek an up to 10% equity stake in Lithium Americas as the company renegotiates its $2.2 billion Energy Department loan. It would follow the administration making a similar move following its investment in Intel. We turn now to Power Moves with Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick, who joins live from World Headquarters in New York for more.
Yeah, Kate, an interesting day on Wall Street. And just a correction here as the president talks about 48 record highs. To be clear, the S&P 500 has notched so far this year 28 record highs. It was on a three-day run, but that streak was broken today. You see the red on your screen. A bit of a pullback because of concerns about the economy and concerns about whether rate cuts will come soon enough. In fact, you did see in the Treasury space, they actually snapped a four-day losing streak. That actually pushed yields slightly down here on the shorter end of the curve, as some folks in this market are anticipating a potential continuation of those rate cuts that ostensibly started just a few days ago with the Fed. Meanwhile, you did see a pullback, a move in oil today, a move higher in oil today, as a lot of the developments that we're starting to see overseas with Ukraine continuing to hit some of the key energy targets in Russia. That was the complexion of the broad cross-asset space here on this day. But Joe and Kate, you mentioned it just there. A big move today in the after-hours trade for a company called Lithium Americas, which is actually based in Canada. But we did learn, based on a Reuters report citing people familiar with the situation, that the U.S. government will be taking a 10% stake in that company, ostensibly to facilitate the mining of lithium at a site in Nevada that Lithium Americas has been trying to start for quite some time. Those shares in the after-hours trade up 75%. This is a small cap stock, but we should point out most of the other lithium miners that are publicly traded also moving higher here in the after-hours session, including Cipher and the biggest miner in the world, Albemarle.
Fascinating. Romaine, thank you. Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick with Power Moves on Balance of Power. Coming up, Danish authorities investigating a drone incident at Copenhagen Airport that halted flights overnight, with Russia suspected. We'll discuss in our conversation with Alexander Stubb, the president of Finland, up ahead. But first, a look into how the UK is working to have clean power by the year 2030. We'll discuss how the UN is watching these efforts with Ed Miliband, UK's Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
We're getting rid of the falsely named renewables. They're too expensive. They're not strong enough to fire up the plants that you need to make your country great. And most of them are built in China, and I give China a lot of credit. They build them, but they very few wind farms. So why is it that they build them and they send them all over the world, but they barely use them? You know what they use? Coal. They use gas. They use almost anything, but they don't like wind.
It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio alongside Kate Davidson. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. That was President Trump earlier today in a wide-ranging, near hour-long address to the UN General Assembly. Touched everything from immigration to his opposition, as you just heard, to renewable energy, even calling climate change a, quote, con job. Joining us now with his perspective live from World Headquarters in New York is Ed Miliband, UK Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero. Mr. Secretary, it's great to have you back with us here on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm assuming you had a chance to listen to the president's address today. And among some of the things that he talked about was Russia funding its war in part by European nations buying Russian oil, Russian LNG, either directly or indirectly. He's calling on them to stop doing so he can, in fact, impose secondary sanctions. Is the president accurate? And to your extent, is the UK right now buying any Russian energy products?
Look, the United Kingdom was importing small amounts of Russian gas before the war began, but we want to get off imported fossil fuels. In fact, we're moving away from fossil fuels as a whole, because what we saw in our country when Russia invaded Ukraine was energy bills go through the roof. And indeed, our clean power mission, which you talked about before the break, Joe, is all about an energy security move. It's all about tackling the climate crisis, yes, but it's about us having secure, homegrown energy, renewables, nuclear. So indeed, as you say, we aren't reliant on petrostates and dictators for our energy sources.
Mr. Secretary, the UK Health Secretary today said people shouldn't pay attention to what President Trump says about medicine and should instead trust science. Do you think that his views on fossil fuels, wind farms, renewables should also be dismissed?
I think what President Trump said today is something he said many times before. I think his opposition to wind power and indeed his enthusiasm for fossil fuels is well known. Now, President Trump is the duly elected president of the United States, and he has a mandate for what he is doing in the US. Likewise, we are the duly elected government of the United Kingdom, and we have a mandate for our mission, Kate. And as I said earlier to Joe, the reason why we're driving ahead with the renewables that we need and nuclear is to get off fossil fuels, because unlike America, we are a price taker, not a price maker when it comes to fossil fuels. So whether it is fossil fuels from the North Sea or imported fossil fuels, what happens is that when the energy markets have a shock and prices go up, it's our consumers who pay the bill. So for us, homegrown clean power is not only the right thing for climate, it's the right thing for energy security, and it's the right thing for jobs. We see this as the biggest jobs opportunity of the 21st century.
Are you planning to allow energy drilling in the North Sea?
What we said in the North Sea is that, yes, we will keep existing oil and gas fields open for their lifetime, but we're not going to issue new licenses to explore new fields in the North Sea. And the reason for that, Joe, goes back to what I said about being a price taker. It wouldn't cut energy bills in the UK to allow new licenses to explore new fields. We think the right way forward for the UK is to drive forward with clean homegrown power, but oil and gas will continue to play a role for some decades to come. Nobody's turning off the taps in the North Sea.
How concerned are you about the build-up to COP30, given the lack of climate pledges and the accommodation issues the summit is facing?
You know, what's so interesting, Kate, is being here in New York for New York Climate Week, is obviously the US has its position on these issues. But what I hear from countries right across the world, many of whom are represented here in New York, is they're going ahead with their plans for clean energy. And the reasons for that, and we will be hearing some of these pledges, COP pledges tomorrow, and the reason for that, and this is the big change in the last 15 or 20 years, is the economics is now pointing in the direction of clean energy. If you take solar power or wind power, for many countries around the world, it's the cheaper alternative to fossil fuels. And so I think if you look at the big picture of what's happening, the trend is very clear to me, which is countries moving towards clean energy. Take the UK, for example. In 2010, about 7% of our electricity came from renewables. Today, it's 50%. And I think this represents a trend across the world. And actually, I think it's a great tribute to business and government that has worked together to bring down the costs of solar and wind, which has come down really dramatically, as well as batteries, in the last decade or so.
Mr. Secretary, I've only got a minute left, even less than that, and I don't want to cut you off, but I just want to ask you, having heard the president's speech, having been in the room today, hearing his remarks on climate, do you worry that the world is giving up on climate goals?
No, I don't, Joe. You know, President Trump's views on this are well known, but when you look across the world, so many countries are carrying on moving towards clean energy and tackling climate change. And I think there's a real mood of determination here at New York Climate Week that countries are going to pursue their own national interest. And what's right for so many countries across the world is to stay part of the Paris Agreement, carry on moving towards clean energy, and it's about acting in our national interest.
Appreciate the conversation, as always. Ed Miliband, UK Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero. We thank you, and good to have you at the headquarters in New York. Coming up, we'll continue our coverage of the UN General Assembly here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
The UN has such tremendous potential. All they seem to do is write a really strongly worded letter and then never follow that letter up. It's empty words, and empty words don't solve war. Now, as if to encourage continued conflict, some of this body is seeking to unilaterally recognize a Palestinian state, the rewards would be too great for Hamas terrorists. It's not making Russia look good. It's making them look bad. The United States is fully prepared to impose a very strong round of powerful tariffs, which would stop the bloodshed, I believe, very quickly. But for those tariffs to be effective, European nations, all of you are gathered here right now, would have to join us in adopting the exact same measures. It's time to end the failed experiment of open borders. You have to end it now. See, I can tell you, I'm really good at this stuff. Your countries are going to hell. We'll turn it around. We're going to make our countries better, safer, more beautiful. We're going to take care of our people.
It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Kate Davidson, I'm Joe Matthew. That, of course, President Trump this morning delivering a rather fiery speech in which he assailed members of the UN and other countries over their immigration and climate policies. Joining us now with the latest from President Trump's presence at the UN General Assembly, Bloomberg's Kate Sullivan is live on the White House North Lawn. Kate, that speech, of course, was authored in that building behind you. What was the message the administration was trying to send, other than there's our way and the wrong way?
I think that's definitely the message. You summed it up so well there. Trump touched on a lot of different topics in that speech. He obviously was very critical of the United Nations. He talked a lot about illegal immigration, which was something that, was a central part of his campaign, has been a very big part of his presidency so far with the mass deportations. He made a lot of false claims about climate change, saying that it's a hoax, that it's a con. And interesting, he did not make any huge announcements when it came to Ukraine, but we did, of course, hear after that there was a major shift from the president when it comes to Ukraine, saying that he thinks that Ukraine could get back all of the territory that it has lost to Russia, after saying for months that he thinks that Ukraine was going to have to give up some territory, that land swaps are really on the table here.
Kate, we also heard, or I guess saw on a Truth Social post from the president later talking about Ukraine, some pretty remarkable comments suggesting that Ukraine could win this war, and really talking about Russia's economic vulnerability, I think referring to Vladimir Putin of Russia as a paper tiger. What did you make of these comments? I mean, we have seen and heard the president sort of lose his patience with Vladimir Putin previously and kind of back off of that. Did this feel different to you?
It did feel different to me. I think, this was a major shift from the president when it comes to how he's been talking about Ukraine so far. As we talk, he thinks that Ukraine can get back not just some of the land, but all of the land, which is a big departure in how he's been talking about this. This came after he met with President Zelensky on the sidelines. And as you mentioned, his relationship with Putin has really been deteriorating. I wanted to highlight one comment he made. He today said that he thought he was going to be able to end this war in Ukraine very easily because of his relationship with Putin. And then today he said, unfortunately, that relationship didn't mean anything. So some really sharp words there from the president when it comes to the Russian president, a very major shift here from him on overall on the war in Ukraine.
Bloomberg's Kate Sullivan, thank you. While the president now says the U.S. backs Ukraine in retaking control of its territory, Secretary of State Marco Rubio reaffirmed America's commitment to NATO in the face of Russian aggression. The latest potential sign of Moscow's aggression taking place in Denmark, with reports of drone sightings forcing the closure of major airports, with some officials pointing to Russia. Earlier today, Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall sat down with the president of Finland, Alexander Stubb, in the midst of the UN General Assembly, where NATO security was front and center. Here's that conversation.
President Trump is working towards peace. He's brokered quite a few peace agreements already. And together with his European colleagues and with President Zelensky and also with President Putin, he's been working towards a peace in Ukraine. And I think the message today seems to be the one that he's been pushing forward for the past few weeks, which is to put more economic pressure on Russia. And I think the focus is very much on Europeans stopping to buy Russian oil and gas. And of course, we are in a situation where we have reduced the buying of Russian gas with 80% and oil 90%. But there's still those few percentage points, and they basically go with Slovakia and Hungary. So I think the message is very strong and very good.
Do you agree with this assessment when it comes to territory for Ukraine?
Definitely. I mean, Finland is a country that obviously has had its experience in World War II, for instance, with Russia, and we lost 10% of our territory. But that was a peace agreement. But our take is that Ukraine should retain not only its independence and sovereignty, but also its territorial integrity, and Finland will never de jure, so legally, accept any acquisition of Ukrainian territory for Russia, whether it's the Crimean Peninsula, Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhzhia, or Kherson.
Another part, sticking part in the negotiations has been the idea of security guarantees, and we touched on how you have this close relationship with President Trump. I am wondering if you've gotten any indication that the U.S. is willing to offer more when it comes to security guarantees, or have those talks stalled?
In the past few weeks, actually ever since President Trump met President Putin in Alaska, we've been working on security guarantees, and I think the basic framework is there. So the number one responsibility is with Ukraine and the Ukrainian army, because they have the biggest, most capable, experienced and modern army in the world right now. Second, it'll be supported by Europe. And third, there'll be a backstop from the United States. And we've been working through the military construct of it, and they're pretty much ready. And now we'll work on the political construct. But we have to remember that these security guarantees will happen after the war is over.
The other part that's been really dominating the conversation here at the UN and really leading up these past few weeks is that we've seen airspace violations in Poland, Romania, Estonia, of course, a close neighbor to Finland. You said on Friday that these actions show Russia is testing the West. Do you think the Western response has been adequate?
I think it's been adequate so far. I mean, of course, you can go a little bit further, but the bottom line is that Russia tests us on land, so for instance, by instrumentalizing asylum seekers, so using human beings and sending them over the border. We've done legislation to stop that. Then at Christmas last year, they tried us in the sea by cutting undersea cables in the Baltic Sea. NATO came up with, quote unquote, an operation called Baltic Sentry. And now that Russia sent drones flying into Poland, NATO came up with the Eastern Sentry. So my advice always as a Finn is to stay calm in these kinds of situations and build up a deterrent which gives a disincentive for Russia to continue. But when they continue, stay calm and deal with it.
President Trump did say earlier today that NATO allies should shoot down Russian aircraft in breaches. In your view, should NATO take military action to stop airspace violations next time?
I think there are very close protocols on that, which are linked to both the protocols in which NATO reacts into these kinds of situations, and then the way in which the nation states, the member states themselves do, so what kind of operative plans they have. So far, of course, we have invoked Article 4 twice. Poland did it with the drones, and then Estonia did it with the violations of the airspace. These are big military decisions that have to be taken by the allies themselves.
Do you think there should be any sort of mechanism between Article 4 and Article 5?
So far, it's worked quite well. So no one has really tested Article 5 apart from Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden in 9/11. And then Article 4 has been invoked now, my count, 9 times in the history of NATO since 1949. Whether there's something in between, Article 4.5, I think it's too early to say.
If this is Putin trying to test the West, if he is trying to escalate here, what does he do next?
I mean, it's difficult to second guess Putin, but you have to remember that he's testing us in the cyberspace, so cyber attacks. He's testing us with sabotage, undersea or elsewhere. He's been testing us with drones. He's been testing us with violation of airspace. He might test us with critical infrastructure. And the key here, of course, is always to make sure that you attribute it correctly. So we just have to learn how to live with this age of uncertainty and stay calm in the face of it, not to overreact, but be firm enough, because the only thing that Russia understands is power. If you show any weakness or softness, then I think you're in trouble. So far, so good.
When it does come to Finland, and just going back to the airspace violations, I'm wondering if you can confirm, has Finland seen any violations in its airspace recently? I believe the last published violation was in February.
We published them immediately when they happened, so that was a decision that was taken many years ago. In my roster of airspace violations, I don't have in my head how many times it's happened in the past 30 years, but they have been frequently infrequent.
We had started this conversation and you were talking about this idea of tightening sanctions, going after the Russian energy imports that our European allies are importing. And a large part of this is that President Trump wants to impose so-called secondary tariffs on countries like China, India. China, the largest importer of Russian crude at 47%. I'm wondering what you make of what we're seeing when it comes to a strengthening of alliance between China, India, and Russia.
Well, I think there's some multivectoral foreign policy taking place there. I think, of course, Russia and China, there's a direct connection. In the early 1990s, China and Russia had economies of the same size. Now China is over 10 times bigger, and actually with its oil purchase, with its gas purchase, with its technological exchange, it does give the possibility for Russia to conduct the war. So there's a very close link there. Then, of course, with India, India is a very close ally of the European Union and, of course, of the United States as well. So I wouldn't throw them in the same basket. But India is obviously an emerging superpower. It's got demography, it's got economy on its side. And I always argue that it's very important for the West to engage India, work with them very closely.
And one more thought on another comment that we got from President Trump, going back to the airspace violations. When asked if the U.S. would back up NATO allies in such a situation where they would need to shoot down these aircraft, he says that it, quote, depends on the circumstance. What do you make of that assessment from President Trump?
Well, all the conversations that I've had with my American friends and also with President Trump lead me to believe that there's a very strong commitment to NATO and the alliance. Remember that a year ago, if someone would have told me in the summer at the 75th anniversary of NATO that we will hike up our defense expenditure from 2 to 5% next summer, I would have said, you probably need to go and see a doctor. The truth is that due to geopolitical and security circumstance, we've done that. And due to also persuasion from President Trump, we've done that. So I feel that President Trump is very committed to the alliance, to NATO, and certainly to the eastern flank.
Do you have plans to meet with President Trump while you are here in the U.S.? Are there any face-to-face meetings planned?
President Trump is very busy during the UN week. Of course, if ever there's a possibility to meet with the President of the United States, you do that. We will see each other today at the reception in the evening.
That was Alexander Stubb, the president of Finland, earlier today at the UN. Coming up, J.P. Morgan's Jamie Dimon responds to President Trump's new H-1B visa fee. We'll have details, and we'll continue our conversation on the president's impact at the UN General Assembly. Following this morning's fiery speech, we'll discuss with our political panel next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio alongside Kate Davidson. I'm Joe Matthew. We'll continue our conversation on the president's presence at the UN General Assembly with our political panel in just a moment. First, the stories we're watching in today's Power Brief. J.P. Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon reacting to President Trump's new $100,000 fee on H-1B visas, saying it caught everyone, including his company, off guard, and that he had a lot of phone calls over the weekend trying to figure out what this means for their future. Dimon also telling India's Financial Times, quote, "For us, visas matter because we move people around globally. The challenge is that the U.S. still needs to remain an attractive destination," unquote.
A federal jury found Ryan Routh, a building contractor from North Carolina, guilty of attempting to assassinate President Trump at his golf course last year, handing him a sentence with a maximum penalty of life in prison. Routh decided to go without legal counsel and represent himself, creating a fast-moving trial that lasted only 12 days. Reports from the Florida courthouse also say that after hearing the verdict, Routh attempted to stab himself in the neck with a pen until he was restrained by marshals.
And Nexstar Media Group says it'll join Sinclair in not airing Jimmy Kimmel Live as the recently suspended show returns to air tonight. The two station groups account for about 23% of U.S. households, with Sinclair being the largest owner of ABC affiliates, including here in Washington, D.C. So, yeah, that means President Trump and potentially hundreds of thousands of viewers in the nation's capital area will miss out on the show when it airs live. We should note Nexstar is currently seeking FCC approval for its more than $6 billion merger with Tegna, and Sinclair also exploring merger options that could land it before the FCC. Joining us now with their reaction to this story and more. Down to just 7 days until a government shutdown, this evening's political panel. Lester Munson is with us, Republican strategist and principal of the international practice at BGR Group, alongside Democratic strategist Caitlin Legacki, former senior advisor to Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo in the Biden administration. It's great to have you both here. Lester, did they do this on purpose? They knew that President Trump didn't want to see Jimmy Kimmel tonight, so it's not going to be on in the nation's capital.
I think it's a mistake. People want the fight. They want to see the reaction. Let's get Kimmel and Trump engaged here. This is really driving up ratings for both of them. May have been a missed opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And Caitlin, do you think that this is really a strategic decision by these stations? I mean, what do they need to see, do you think, from Jimmy Kimmel to agree to bring the show back?
I think it's less what they need to see from Jimmy Kimmel than what the FCC is looking for from Sinclair and Nexstar. What has happened over the last week represents a huge abuse of power, with the FCC threatening to pull broadcast licenses or the administration threatening to block these mergers. And so I think that what we are going to see tonight with the blackout in D.C. is Sinclair continuing to show the FCC that it wants to play ball in an effort to get its, regulatory house in order.
Got a live view of the El Capitan Theater, which people are having some fun with as we wait to see Jimmy Kimmel a little bit later on there on Hollywood Boulevard, walking over the stars. What's your read on this, Lester? Kimmel gets back on the air. Is that a loss for Trump, or did he actually gain some capital by forcing his suspension?
Well, I don't know that Trump was really that interested in forcing him out. I think this was Brendan Carr at the FCC, maybe acting independently here. I'm sure Trump appreciated the effort. And I don't disagree with Caitlin either, by the way. I think, but it does bring up a larger issue here, which is, why in the world is the federal government regulating this industry anymore? There's not broadcast journalism, broadcast news is not what it used to be. The whole broadcast entertainment industry is not what it used to be. People do not have a dearth of options. We don't need the federal government stepping in and regulating these things in this way. So I think it should be an argument for smaller government.
Well, do you think, and maybe you can both take a swing at this, will Kimmel be off the air until there's a ruling on that Tegna merger? What do you think, Lester?
My quick guess is it's going to depend on what his ratings are. Can he use this this conflict to elevate himself to another level? His ratings weren't that great before. Can he use this as a way to kind of jump into to a different level? That would be pretty impressive.
Are ratings more important than a pending merger?
I think it's a good question. I think that he's going to be off air in important markets like D.C. longer than in other markets, probably. But I don't expect they're going to keep him off the air until the merger goes through.
Caitlin, the president today, shifting a little bit to the shutdown that's just a few days out now. The president seeming to call Democrats bluff by saying, he's not going to meet with them unless they drop their demands. What is the political risk for Democrats if they allow this shutdown to happen?
Well, I think it's a question of what is the risk for Republicans for forcing the shutdown. Democrats have wisely taken a posture of identifying the core issue, which is health care, that it's going to take to get them to yes. They have asked to meet with the president to negotiate what it will take to get to yes. The president, ran as a deal maker. He positions himself as a deal maker. You cannot be a deal maker if you're not willing to meet with the other side. And so I think what happened today actually really strengthened the Democrats' hand, because they have extended the olive branch. They've made the overtures that they are willing to sit down and talk, and the other side has refused.
We were just showing a tweet from Hakeem Jeffries that starts with a taco, Lester. Trump always chickens out. He says Donald Trump just canceled a high-stakes meeting in the Oval Office with myself and Leader Schumer. The extremists want to shut down the government because they're unwilling to address the Republican health care crisis that is devastating America. And now, as the Republican on our panel, you're going to tell everybody that this is simply Biden's budget we're talking about, right?
That's actually a great point, Joe. I hadn't thought of that. I think I was going to criticize Leader Jeffries for packing too many messages into one tweet. He's got the taco thing. He's got the extremist thing. He's trying to blame Republicans for the shutdown. I will disagree with Caitlin a little bit here. Democrats are the ones who want this shutdown. They want to define themselves against Trump. They're seizing this opportunity. They're the ones who are effectively making the decision in the Senate not to vote for the budget that is supported by a majority of the Senate. So if you go back 30 years to the original Newt Gingrich, Bill Clinton battle, the president has a pretty good position in all of this because of the nature of our system. The Democrats are going to have a tough time blaming all of this on Republicans, and I think they know that. So I'm actually looking, I expect there's going to be a deal here in the next 6 or 7 days. That's still plenty of time to come to an agreement.
Caitlin, you mentioned, of course, the deal making the president likes to boast about. And in the first term, I'm struck by the fact that we had Steven Mnuchin, who had this relationship with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and they seemed to get through a lot of these sticky situations when the stakes maybe were even higher. We had debt ceiling showdowns. Is there anyone like that now in this administration that Democrats can go to try to, break this impasse?
There's not. I mean, all my Democratic friends joke that we yearn for Steven Mnuchin. I think his cabinet this time around is different, but also Trump's posture in this second term is very different. And you see it at the UN, you see it in domestic politics. He's much more willing to drive a harder line and force the issue than he was in his first term. And so it leads, I think, to more direct confrontation, which we're seeing now.
If we see a deal in the next 6 or 7 days, as you mentioned, Lester, will that include an extension of Obamacare subsidies? No one's in town right now. By the time the House gets back, we're beyond the start of the new fiscal year.
Yeah, look, I think at the end of the day, the administration is going to be willing to negotiate on some of these details. Everyone has to kind of posture now and get into their corners and issue the tough statements. And that's what they're doing. It's 7 days away. We've got that's a long time in political life these days. So I think there's plenty of room here for the president to flip, as he did on Ukraine today, to flip on this issue and go ahead and start messaging that it's not really Obamacare anymore, it's Trump care or something like that, and be real positive about it.
Caitlin, just briefly, how long of a shutdown do you think, if we had a brief one, how long would it take before there was some kind of political impact?
Well, I think we have the governor's elections in November. So at the very latest, we would see some political impact in Virginia and New Jersey, which are often considered bellwether states. But I would be shocked if we have a shutdown that lasts that long.
Lester Munson and Caitlin Legacki, thank you. To learn more about all these stories you heard here tonight, make sure to check out the Washington Edition newsletter on the terminal and online.
We'll be following the president on his trip home from New York. In the meantime, thank you for joining us here on Balance of Power. We'll do it again tomorrow alongside Kate Davidson. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. This is Bloomberg TV and Radio.